Okay, so we're now recording, just so as you all know that, for GDPR reasons or whatever. Right, let's get the chat box up so I can at least see that for now. Good, right, I can see you all responding there. That's great. Right, okay, I'll share screen again now. And hopefully you can all see that now. Okay, so this evening I'm going to talk about some of the basics of behavior change, and I'm going to consider it both from an individual perspective, so from your own perspectives, but if you're a trainer, coach, nutritionist, dietitian, also from your client's perspective as well, and maybe look at some things you want to consider when you're talking to clients about making lifestyle, nutrition type changes, some of the things you want to consider to kind of implement as part of your program to maybe aid that change process. Because much as we think behavior change kind of happens organically and people just know how to do it, the truth of the matter is it doesn't. And there are definitely some techniques you can employ that are likely to enhance your chances of making a change yourself and enhance your client's chances of making a change as well. So some of these are really easy to apply, others need a little bit more knowledge behind them, but generally I'm hoping you can use most of the things I'm going to suggest. So the first thing I want to think about when we talk about behavior change, it's all very well having ideas about it, but really, if we're coming from an evidence-based standpoint, we should at least be aware of what particular psychological models we're applying, how they apply, and what maybe some of the science is behind it. That's not to say you need to understand the research, but everything I'm going to tell you tonight is based in research. So it's not just my personal opinion. A lot of it has came out of my doctoral research, but some of this has been studied in depth. There's a lot of weight behind it in terms of the scientific evidence. I'm going to concentrate specifically on the trans theoretical model of change. And the trans theoretical model, as the kind of title suggests in trans theoretical, it looks across a number of different theories and implements them. Now, the one thing I would say about this is it's not the be all and end all. There are numerous models that you could apply to this, and certainly with some of your clients, other models are equally as applicable. But these are the ones I found mainly in a weight management context, admittedly, but a lot of the research has been done in other areas as well. So not just weight management, but exercise behavior, changing nutrition, and so on. And so I'm going to look at some of the models you'll be familiar with. Certainly the first one, most of you will be, certainly if you're a personal trainer, nutritionist, dietitian, because everybody kind of talks about this. And then I'm going to look at some of the others. The one thing I would say about all of these models is you can measure people's where they're kind of at theoretically in terms of the model itself. There are psychometric tests out there that you can use to measure where a person is at. And so this type of assessment data, I think, is actually quite important, certainly for personal trainers, because I use personal trainers in my research. I firmly believe that trainers should assess their clients' readiness for change before taking them on. And the reason I say that is if you take a client on that's not ready to change, again, the research highlights that they are most likely going to drop out anyway. So not only is that going to be detrimental to your business, it's also detrimental to the client because they fail and they don't feel so good about it. And so that's a setback for them as well. So far better that we take on clients that are ready to change. The one caveat I would add to that is we can help people make a change if they're not ready. So if we've assessed them as not ready, by using skills like motivational interviewing, we can move a person from a state of preparing, contemplating, that type of thing, into action. So there are techniques, skills you can use that will help clients move forward and get them into a psychological state where they are ready to change. But you can only really use this, well, you could use it anytime, but at least if you understand where you're starting from, you can then assess in the future how successful you've been in moving somebody psychologically in terms of forward progress. Buttons. Right. So the first model I want that makes up part of the trans theoretical model is stages of change. Most of you are going to be familiar with that, so I'm not going to kind of spend a lot of time on this, but I am going to look at a couple of elements of the stages of change in terms of things you might do around it and things you want to consider if you accept that stages of change was initially based on smoking behavior and smoking cessation, but it's now been researched certainly in exercise behavior, certainly in dietary behavior, and any other number of different behaviors. So stages of change is very broadly applicable to behavior change. The next one I will look at is self-efficacy. You can kind of think of self-efficacy as self-confidence. But the thing about these two models is they kind of intertwine, and one predicts what the other's going to do, or vice versa, or even to some degree. And so, again, if you can assess these, you can kind of get a feel for how successful your program is, or how successful your program is working. And then decisional balance theory. So, this is weighing up the pros and cons. Janice and Mann, who proposed this theory, said that when we decide to do anything in life, we actually use a balance sheet in our brain and we weigh up pros and cons. And if the pros outweigh the cons, we will tend to proceed with that behavior. If they're kind of even, we would consider that what we would call ambivalence. And so we're not sure which way to go. And this is where something like motivational interviewing comes in, because motivational interviewing will allow you to take somebody that's in an ambivalent state and help them shift their decisional balance. It's most probably wrong to say you can shift their decisional balance. You can't. But the only person that's going to change that is the individual themselves. But what you do with motivational interviewing is you allow them to explore how to do that, basically. So these are the three main kind of psychological models that we're going to look at. But I'm also going to briefly consider procrastination, and Baumeister looks at this. And the other thing I want to kind of think about, whether this be making decisions for yourself or helping clients make decisions, is willpower, and how we might kind of consider willpower, boost it, things like that. I'm just checking there's no. Yeah, nothing. Okay, good. Right, so they're the main models, and as I say, you can test all these using psychometric tests. I did this in my research, and so you can assess where somebody's at. So this is the model for change. Now, hopefully most of you are kind of familiar with this. And so we move from pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance. It's fluid. You can't put time scales on this. Some of these, you can stay in some of these stages for months, if not years. In terms of relapse, and I'm going to talk about relapse a little bit more in a bit, but you can relapse from any stage. You do not necessarily relapse back to the previous stage. You can go from being in action. So a classic one would be somebody stopping smoking, and they can have managed to have stopped for a number of months. Something then happens in their life, and they can relapse all the way back to pre-contemplation in terms of they're not even thinking about it now. So in that respect, it's very fluid. One of my problems with kind of assessing stages is with humans, you're not get it's very difficult to say at what point you move from pre-contemplation into contemplation. I would say it's more on a continuum. So stages almost kind of feels like, well, I'm either in this stage or I'm in that stage. Sometimes I think you can be between the two. It's quite fluid. So I prefer to think of it as a continuum. And then that ties in quite nicely then with how self-efficacy ties into this. So the first thing I want to do actually is get you all to do a psychometric test. Now, this is a real simple psychometric test. So some psychometric tests can be 24, 32, 50 questions long, but this is a real simple one. And interestingly, in my research, was found to be fairly accurate actually in predicting the stage of change that an individual is in. Now, this one is specifically designed for weight management. And actually, it doesn't matter if you're trying to lose weight or if you're not, because when you do this, it will predict where you're at. Now, if you're not trying to lose weight, which might be the case for a number of you, then you are either going to come out as a pre-contemplator, because you're not thinking about it. You may also come out as being in maintenance, because you can kind of think of this as circular. If you're in maintenance and your weight is staying the same, then you can almost think, well, you're actually a pre-contemplator as well, because you're not thinking about it. So very often, if you're not trying to lose weight and you're not really conscious of it, this test will show you as either being pre-contemplation or maintenance, just as a heads up for you. So you just need a bit of pen and paper. Very simple test. I'll give you a few minutes to just answer the questions. And all you need to do is record your answers, yes or no. So just record your answers according to, and don't try to overthink this. And that's true of all psychometric tests. Don't try to think, oh, now what are they trying to get at here? Almost trying to outthink the test. The best way to do these type of tests is just to look at the question and answer it yes or no. So I'll give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, so hopefully now you've either got all yeses, all nos, or a combination of any of those. So as long as you know what we got there in the chat box, what did somebody put there? Oh, right. Okay. I wonder why we only had 100. How can I change that? Anybody know? Just unmute yourself if anybody's a Zoom expert. Maybe I can change the number of participants. I don't know.
I'm far from an expert, but I think you need to have a pro account in order to have more than 100.
I have to have what? Sorry?
Like a special type of pro account that you pay for.
I've got a paid account. It should let anybody.
That's weird then.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that.
Sorry.
No. I mean, it's not locked. So, I don't know. I don't know how to resolve that. Oh, that's a bit annoying. I can't think of anything else. Oh, well, I can't resolve that, so I'm not going to try. I'm recording it, so I can just let people have recordings if they want it. It's a bit of a pain. Oh, somebody else got any idea? Oh, I thought you could have more than 100. Oh, okay. Well, it is what it is. I'm not. It's just unfortunate. Okay, so what you're looking for in terms of working out where you're at is you're looking for the pattern. So if you've got no in question 1 and 2, so if your first two answers are no, just look at question number 3, and depending on whether you've answered no or yes there, that will tell you which. So if you've answered 3 no's in a row, then you'll be in pre-contemplation. And if your first two answers are no, and your third question is yes, then you're in contemplation. So you're kind of thinking about it. If you've put yes in question 1 or 2, in that case, you just jump straight to question 4 and look at what your answer is there. And so if you've got yes in question 1 or 2, look at question number 4. If you've answered no, you're in action. Oh, I think that was because somebody dropped out. And if you answered yes, you're in maintenance. So depending on what your answers are there. So just look for the pattern. 2 no's in questions 1 and 2. Just look at question number 3. A yes in question 1 and 2. Just jump to question 4. And so that's a real simple way of finding out what stage of change you're in. There is a more complex psychometric test called the Eureka, which is University of Rhode Island Change Assessment Scale. And that gives you scores for all the stages, but it's a longitudinal test. In other words, it has to be done over a number of weeks, and then you look for patterns within the data. But that's a simple example of a straightforward kind of psychometric test. And in my research, it proved to be very accurate in terms of predicting a stage of change. So coming back to the stages of change, the first thing I want to look at is over this side. And if I put my pointer on, might be useful. If it'll let me do this. Come on. Laser point. Here we go. So this side, how do we help our clients progress through the stages, regardless of whether we know where they're at? The one thing that we do know from the trans-theoretical model, and certainly from data in my research, is that as self-efficacy increases, in other words, as people's levels of self-efficacy goes up, they progress through the stages of change. In other words, they move forward. So one of the things you're looking to do as a coach, trainer, nutritionist, dietitian is increase your client's self-efficacy. And if it's yourself that's making the change, you also would apply some of the similar principles. Now, things that are going to increase a client's self-efficacy are education. So actually understanding the problem. So rather than telling people, oh, just do this, you'll lose weight, or just do this, your diet will be healthier, always give people reasons why, because as you increase educational understanding, the other thing you're doing is you're improving the client's capability or their perceived capability. And we know that capability ties into motivation. And one of the other things we're trying to build along with the client's level of self-efficacy, and you can kind of think of self-efficacy a bit like self-confidence, but the other thing we're trying to do is build intrinsic motivation. Now, I'm not really talking much about motivation tonight. We've got Ryan and Desai are the two authors you want to look at if you want to understand motivation. But their motivation comes on a kind of a linear scale as well. And at one end, at the end, we want to be with a client is intrinsic motivation. In other words, you're finding it from within to make the changes. Whereas at the other end of that scale is extrinsic motivation, and that's external. So an example of that would be a trainer standing over somebody going, come on, you can do 10 more press ups, you've got it in you, or whatever. That's extrinsic. It's not coming from within and is not really that effective. So we want to build intrinsic motivation. And one of the things that will build that is capability. And capability comes from following through and doing the action. So actually achieving something and actually understanding why they're doing it. Now, a big part of my research was nutrition education. And the trainers spent a lot of time educating their clients about some of the real basics of nutrition. Um, and when I taught the trainers themselves, I taught them all about the kind of molecular basis and the carbohydrate and hydrogen and oxygen and so on, and how enzymes worked, how the body digests and so on. And I said to them, I don't think you'll really need this with your clients, but I'm giving you another level of knowledge. So as when you're teaching clients, you at least understand what's going on behind. And what was interesting was a lot of them came back to me and said, oh no, my clients wanted to know all that. And once they knew all that and understood it, they acted on it. So education is really important, and do it in bite sizes, because as people understand why they're doing something, they are more likely to do it, and it increases their self-efficacy. And as I say, what you see is as self-efficacy increases, people progress through the stages of change. And I was able to measure this with the psychometric tests, and we could clearly see people advancing through the stages and their scores for each of the stages changing as their self-efficacy ramped up. And that was because the trainers were doing a good job in building that self-confidence, that ability, that capability. One of the other things I'm going to talk about towards the end of this is goal setting. And long-term goals are great, and we do need those, but actually short-term goals are equally as important, because all these little baby steps, every time you achieve a goal, it actually helps in terms of building that capability, the self-efficacy. So actually short-term goals, literally weekly goals, are very important. And if you're doing this for yourself, you're trying to make the change, make sure you're setting yourself weekly targets. And the other thing I would say about that, I will look at goal setting in a little bit more detail. But when you are setting yourself weekly targets, make sure that you've told somebody else about them. So as you're accountable to somebody. If you're working with a trainer, nutritionist, dietitian, whatever it might be, then you're accountable to them. But actually, it's quite helpful if you tell other people about it, because then you feel accountable. You are more likely to do it. And this goes for trainers as well. If you're trying to improve your business skills, your exercise skills, your knowledge of nutrition, whatever it is, tell people what your goals are, tell people what you're striving for, because then you feel accountable. And undoubtedly, accountability helps. So that's one side of the model. We've kind of looked at how do we move people forward, but you can kind of think of this as a seesaw, because the other side of this model is relapse. And relapse is actually a natural part of any behavior change we make. Any of us trying to make a change, from time to time, we will have a relapse. And it's so important that you think about this when you first start to make a change. And if you are working with clients, it's the elephant in the room, but you should talk about it in that very first session. Because in that very first session, 9 times out of 10, when clients come on board, they're super confident about, oh, yeah, I'm going to be able to lose weight. I'm going to get fit. I'm going to train 3 to 5 times a week. And so when confidence is that high, and sometimes it's unrealistic, then that is the time that you talk about relapse. And they maybe won't want to hear it. You know, you can say to them, look, at some point, something's going to go wrong. You're going to have a bad day at work. The kids are going to play up. This is going to go wrong. The boiler doesn't work, whatever it might be. And you just think, sod it, I'm having a glass of wine and chocolate cake. And so you relapse. The problem with that is when you relapse, and when a lot of people have a relapse, and we've all done it, when that happens, we often catastrophize it, and we just think, oh, that's it. I've ruined it. I've dropped out the program. I've messed it up. I didn't exercise for 2 days, whatever it might be. And so we kind of blow it up out of all proportion. And so because we think it's such a catastrophe, we've had that chocolate cake and our glass of wine. You think, oh, sod it. Well, I might as well finish the bottle now. I've messed it up anyway. I'll start again next Monday, or I'm going to finish off the whole chocolate cake, or I'm going to have fish and chips, or whatever it might be. But oh, I'm not going to go back to the gym now. I'll give it a rest. I need a bit of a breather. I need to put my feet up. Maybe I've been training too hard. We convince ourselves that the best thing would be to do would be more of it, and so that makes it worse. And so this is actually documented in the scientific literature, and it's known as the "what the hell" effect. And so it goes wrong. We have the wine, we have the chocolate cake, and then, oh, what the hell? I've wrecked it anyway. I might as well have another bit. I might as well leave it now till Monday. And that's the way we manage it. And anybody that's ever tried losing weight, getting fit, whatever it might be, one of these kind of challenging lifestyle changes, if they've done it in the past, they will recognize this. Now, the key thing is, A, to bring it up now, even though they don't want to hear about it, because, like I say, at this point, they're going to be super confident now, it won't affect me. But more importantly, it's to highlight how to manage it when it does happen. And that is kind of the key concept I want to look at here. So, like I say, they maybe don't want to talk about it, but this is what you're going to do. So, the first thing to do is don't need to think of it as failure, because you'll often hear that language, oh, I've failed. It's just me. I've got no willpower. I can't stick at anything. This type of language. And so, what we need to do is rephrase the way to think about this. So, we're not going to think of it as failure. We're going to think of it as feedback. Now, you say to your client, look, this will happen. At some point, this is going to happen. It's kind of inevitable. But what I want you to do is, when it has happened and you might have had the glass of wine and the chocolate cake, don't worry about it. A, don't feel guilty about it. And this is actually quite important. Research suggests that the best way to manage the what the hell effect is to remove guilt, accept that it's part of the human process, because it's actually the guilt that drives you to kind of I'll have a bit more cake or have some more wine or not start again till Monday. And of course, Monday never comes. So remove the guilt. And so by talking about it now and saying to them, look, it will happen. Don't worry about it. It happens to all of us. It's human nature. But when it does happen, what I want you to do is I want you to think about, why did this happen? So what was it that drove me to have the wine, the cake, whatever it might be? How could I avoid that happening again? And even if I can't avoid it happening again, how could I manage it better? What could I do differently that I wouldn't feel so bad about it? And so now they've got something in place, and now we've got feedback. And this is the way any of us learn. You only ever learn by failing. Failing actually teaches you something, as long as you're willing to learn from it. So as long as you sit down, accept that it's happened, and think to yourself, right, next time this happens, I'm going to do A, B, C, D. It's now been a learning experience, and actually empowers you and makes your chances of success that little bit better. And we know from the literature on smoking behavior that most people, when they quit smoking, it normally takes 5 or 6 attempts. And so learning from it is the key thing. So talk about it early, talk about it in the first session. And if it's for yourselves, think about it in the same way. Don't feel guilty about it. It's human nature. Learn from it and plan how you're going to manage it better next time, and then just crack on. And so being aware of that is very important, and making clients aware of it. The other thing about that is, um, as well as making people aware of it, it's like it makes the management of it that much better, and so people feel that much better about it. So talk about it. Don't be scared of it, and utilize it as part of your initial consultation. So be aware of the what the hell effect, and be aware of how to manage it. Remove the guilt, as it were. So think of it as not failure, but feedback. So that's the behavior change model. And as I say, you can utilize these skills yourself. You can certainly utilize it with clients. The other thing about talking about it first off, when the client then rings you up and maybe wants to drop out of the program, or says, oh, it's not for me, I've messed it all up or whatever, you can then say to them, remember we talked about this when we first started, about how you may have a relapse. And because you've already discussed it, it sounds a lot more genuine than if they ring, if you haven't talked about it and they ring and you go, oh, don't worry, it happens to everybody. That starts to sound like you're just saying that because you want to kind of keep them in your program. But if you've talked about it right at the start, it sounds a lot more genuine, and actually I think is most probably likely to be taken on board that much better. So that's the what the hell effect. So this is a decisional balance model, and this was proposed by Janice and Mann. And as I said, they said that when we make changes, we weigh things up, pros and cons. And so there's a psychometric test that can measure this. And what I found was, not only do the pros have to outweigh the cons, there has to be a certain gap between the two. So if your pros and cons are quite close, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to progress for too long. So there kind of needs to be enough of a differentiation there. Now, something very basic that you can do to test this is literally to take a spreadsheet approach and get your clients to write down all their pros for change, all the reasons they want to make this change. Then when they've done that, turn that sheet over and then get a separate sheet and now list all their cons. Now, the reason you do it on two separate sheets is, if you do it on the same sheet, human nature says you will compare. And so you'll see a pro, you'll try to think of a con for it. So it's actually quite important to just write all your pros and then come over and write all your cons. And then you can compare the two. Now, in the basics of behavior change e-workshop, I talk about using the decisional balance grid. And so that is looking at the pros and cons, but it's also projecting into the future and thinking about the pros and cons of not change. Because often when we make changes in life, we do think a lot about the present moment in terms of as I sit here now making this decision, but we often don't project forward and think, well, what are the consequences of that decision? And when I say by consequences, it's like if we were talking about losing weight, just as an example, or exercise actually, both of which are obviously beneficial in terms of coronary heart disease, diabetes, other disease states. We often think about, oh yeah, the pros are, yeah, a less chance of a heart attack. I'll be healthy. I'll be able to get in small. What we don't often think about is what are the cons if I don't make this change? We don't think about the future consequences of not changing. And so the decisional balance grid, which I use on the basics of behavior change workshop, helps you kind of allow the client to visualize all those scenarios. And by putting it in writing in a grid, it kind of helps the client clarify, if for want of a better word, their decision making. So as a basic tool, just getting people to write down their pros and cons on separate sheets and then comparing them. The other beauty of this is you as a professional can look at them, and often the cons, some of the things that a client has put down as a con may not be true. So in their cons list, they might have something like, oh, I'm going to have to give up all alcohol. I'll never be able to have fried food or something like that. Now you can educate them about, no, you can have that as part of a kind of, a moderate diet, whatever. You don't have to exclude anything. It's things in moderation. So education, it could be that what the pros and cons will throw up is where there's miseducation. So get them to look at that. Right, now the next one, I put this in here simply because I get this a lot with students. So I thought it's worth kind of looking at, because I think we're all kind of guilty of doing this from time to time. Procrastinate over making a decision, put it off. Oh, well, I'll start on Monday. My exercise regime starts Monday. My diet starts Monday, whatever it is. So here's a couple of quotes about procrastination. So to think too long about doing a thing often becomes its undoing. Kind of makes sense. If you want to make an easy job seem mighty hard, then just keep putting it off. It kind of grows then in its enormity. And the best way to get something done is actually to start it. And that kind of brings me to these next points that I've put in red. If there's something you're putting off doing, whether it be starting the diet, whether it be starting the exercise regime, whether it be finishing an assignment, whether it be doing something for your business, whether it be your tax returns or whatever, say to yourself, I am going to spend 10 minutes doing this task, and be really honest with yourself and say, I'm going to do 10 minutes of it, and then I'm going to knock it on the head and do something else. And the reason you do that is, firstly, if you do it for 10 minutes and don't want to do any more, then you've given yourself permission to stop, which is fine. But very often what you'll find is you've built a task up in terms of its enormity. And actually, when you start the task, whatever it might be, and you kind of get into it, you think, do you know what? This isn't so bad. I think I'm going to crack on with it. So exercise would be, I'm not going to go for my run today. I can't be bothered. So what you say to yourself is, do you know what? I'm just going to do a 10-minute run, and then I'll come back and I'll relax and do something else. And very often, but just getting your kit on and going out and doing 10 minutes, you just think, do you know what? This isn't so bad. I'll do another 10 minutes. So you can use this technique almost to trick the brain in terms of, okay, I can cope with this. So that's a little tool you can use for pretty much any task that hits you in day to day. I always say to students that have got assignments to submit, write something down. Just get something on paper, because it's very satisfying, even if it's just your introductory 3 sentences or whatever it might be. You now feel you've started it. You're on the mountain, you're starting to climb. Just get something done. And very often that spurs you on to think, do you know what? That's not so bad. I can write a bit more. I can do a bit more.
Now, I can do something about
Okay. Now, the next thing I want to look at is willpower. We often hear people, when they drop out of a diet program, when they drop out of an exercise program, say, oh, I haven't got the willpower. I can't stick at it. And so we need to understand, A, what willpower is, and B, how to help either ourselves or help our clients manage their resource of willpower better. Now, the first thing to say about willpower, as the slide says, is willpower is a finite resource. You can think of it as the fuel, the petrol can, diesel can, whatever, on your diesel tank on your car. It can only hold so much fuel. And if you decide to drive a long way, you use up the fuel. It's a similar thing that if you set yourself too many tasks to do, you deplete willpower very quickly. And so setting yourself too many kind of tasks that require a bit of willpower to push through with it will deplete your resources very quickly. And this is often what we see with diets. If you look at most diet plans that are out there, I don't care which one you want to look at, whether it be 5-2, keto, high protein, low carb, cabbage soup, whatever it might be, generally what any diet program is getting you to do is make a whole raft of changes. And so we kind of start out with all these changes. And so this next diagram looks at that. So the new diet is a lot of changes. It's a very wide base, but I could number this along the bottom here and it'll be all the different changes you've got to make relevant to your current lifestyle. Similar thing with exercise programs. If you make them too complicated and you make it too difficult to do, you are now relying on a lot of willpower to follow through with that program every week. And especially if you're kind of giving the client lots of different things to do. So you're doing cardio, but you're giving them weights and you want them to do some stretching and whatever it might be. It's a recipe for disaster because you're spreading their willpower too thin. So for every task that you load them up with, that's a chunk of willpower that's needed for that. And so what happens is you've only got a small amount of willpower for each task. And so that gets depleted very quickly. And then they don't do that task. So this is typically the way we make changes in the past. And so what happens over time is we start out with all good intentions, with loads of changes. And now, as the weeks go by, we drop a few because the willpower runs out and we think, oh, I'll give that a miss. I'll drop that one. I won't do that one. And 4 to 6 weeks in, what we've got is hardly any changes. And we've slipped back into all our old habits. Most of the changes are gone. Program's gone out the window. So clearly, this is not effective. And you speak to anybody that's tried to follow a diet program, an exercise program in the past, they will have struggled to kind of stay with the program. And so we need to flip this on its head. And so what you want to do with clients is start out with little and often. Only give them 1 or 2 things to work on. And when I say give them, it should be by choice. Offer them choices. We could try this, we could do that. You have to respect that client's autonomy. It's a key aspect of motivational interviewing is that the client's autonomy must be respected. And so by offering choice around the exercise program, around the nutrition program, you are far more likely to have successes. And so we're going to set little goals, little targets every week. And then they're going to come back the following week, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, that was easy. I like that one. I can do that. No hassle. And then we can agree on something else. Equally, they might come back and go, no, I couldn't do that. I was so busy at work and this happened and that happened. I just couldn't stick with it. That's equally as valid because that tells you, well, if they can't do it when they're working with me, they're not going to do it going forward as a lifestyle change. And so you just bin it, try something else. And what we're doing here is we're building on the successes as we go along. So don't throw too much at clients early on. Yes, they'll be super motivated and they'll kind of take it all in. But when it comes to actually applying it, they've only got so much willpower and only a few of these things are going to stick and you'll lose things early. So start little and often, build on successes. Because going right back to that first slide, as clients have successes, as they're able to stick with different parts of your program, that's building their level of self-efficacy and it's also building their capability. And that's going to improve their intrinsic motivation. And so what we now end up with is a scenario where we're slowly building a strong base and the changes that we have got in place are likely to stay there. Now, this is from Baumeister, who's one of the kind of leading researchers. Dieting is a means for keeping oneself in a chronically depleted state. And what we mean is a chronically depleted state of willpower, because dieting is stressful. As a result, the dieter feels everything more intensely. You've got all these rules to follow. If we're talking the slimming world, it's green days, red days, sins, and God knows what. Loads of rules. So everything in your day is being focused around these dietary changes and meal times and snack times and everything else. That is stressful in itself. And we know that stress actually depletes willpower. And so all these kind of little things, if you've got this amount of intensity around any change, whether it be diet, whether it be exercise, you are already diminishing your chances of that being long term, because you're depleting willpower really early. So anything that kind of sits around the food kind of idea or the exercise parameter is liable to dig in on the willpower. One of the things that seems to help with this is some type of relaxation, whether that just be yoga or whether that be mindfulness. It's like, by building this into the daily routine, that actually helps your body recover some of its willpower. It's almost like a way of topping up the tank. And so a degree of relaxation, chilling out, forgetting about everything is actually not a bad idea to build in as part of your program. So how can individuals resist these things in the face of temptation? Because you're going to get this as time goes along with any type of behavior change. There's going to be the odd temptation. So Baumeister, as I say, he's the man to look up if you really want to know anything. But he sees three necessary components for achieving objections. Firstly, you need to establish the motivation for change and set a clear goal. And what I mean by the motivation for change is, what is your why? Why do you want to do this? What do you see as an end result? And getting people to get very clear about that end goal is actually really important. And the last slide, I'm going to look a little bit more at goal setting and how you can kind of improve that. But getting clear on your goals is very important. So you want a long-term goal, and that goal should be emotionally anchored. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that in the last slide. So getting real clear on your motivation is very important. You need to monitor your behavior towards that goal. Now, as the trainer, coach, dietitian, whatever, that is actually part of your role. So you're monitoring how the clients, you're kind of helping them along the way, and being accountable and self-monitoring in particular is very important in any type of change behavior. This is why apps like any MyFitnessPal, anything like that, any type of self-monitoring that you can get clients to do, whether it be through the use of apps or food activity diaries, self-monitoring definitely helps. The other thing that you want to monitor towards a behavior change is self-talk. What messages do you tell yourself? Are you saying to yourself, oh, it's really difficult for me to exercise, I don't really enjoy it? Because if that's the type of language you're using, that is your truth. That's what you actually believe. And so you need to change that self talk, and you need to monitor it. And so when you hear yourself saying, oh, I really don't enjoy exercise, what you have to do is you have to put yourself in the dock. Imagine you're in court, and now you're going to become the barrister, and you go, is that really true? Where's your evidence for that? How can you support that claim? And so by just thinking it through and thinking, is that true? Or is it just in the moment? Actually, when I exercise, sometimes when I go, I actually enjoy it. And so just by listening to what you say to yourself and policing it, that in itself can be really helpful. So sometimes people will self-sabotage. They'll get so far into a program and then it starts to go wrong, or they have a little hiccup. And then they hear all their old voices about, oh, well, it's just me. It's my genetics. I'm meant to be fat, or this happens every time I do it. But if you police that self-talk and talk it through and think, well, is that really true? Does that necessarily have to be true? Can I do something different to make that not true? Then that's what we mean by self-monitoring, as much as using apps to count calories, count exercise, whatever it might be. So monitor your behavior towards your goal. And again, I'm going to look at goals, because if the goal is emotionally anchored, it tends to be easier to do this step. So whether your goal is to lose weight, kick smoking, study more, spend less time on Facebook, willpower is going to be a critical step to achieving any of these. And so you have to understand A, how to conserve your willpower, and B, how to better use your willpower. And these next two steps will help you with that. We know that blood glucose seems to be an important part of the energy source of self-control. There's been studies done where they've starved people just for kind of 24 hours or so, and then set them tasks of self-control. And then the other group has been properly fed and is feeding regularly. So blood glucose is good. And the self-control in the properly fed group has been way better. So starving yourself as part of a diet program is actually not a good strategy. Although there may be evidence about fasting, the 5 and 2 diet, if you failed at diets before, it could be that that type of diet is not the best strategy for you. And so making sure you're eating healthily and keeping blood sugar at a reasonable level could be quite important, because depleted blood sugar reduces self-control, reduces willpower. The other thing that will reduce your willpower is stress. So if you've got a stressful job, that is actually depleting, because stress with the fight and flight mechanism is actually preparing muscles, heart, major organs ready for one or the other, fight or flight. That utilizes glucose. And so that depletes your levels of willpower as well. So removing stress. So that's why the mindfulness, the yoga, the relaxation techniques are actually very beneficial in terms of just topping up your levels a bit. Even if it's sort of a lunch, if you're in a stressful job, 10 minutes of your lunch break, just doing a bit of mindfulness, a bit of relaxation, a bit of just chill out, will actually boost the kind of blood sugar levels, reduce stress levels, increase the amount of willpower you've got available. So be very careful about how you're managing and using willpower as part of your behavior change, whether that's you personally or whether that's your clients. So final kind of slide here. It's really important when you are working with clients, and I've kind of alluded to this already, but you respect their autonomy, their right to make a choice. The only person that can make a change is your client. The only person that can motivate your client is your client. I'll often see posts about, oh, I'm motivating my clients by doing it. Are you really? I don't think you are. It's a misrepresentation, a misunderstanding of what motivation is. Motivation comes from within, change comes from within. And so the way you achieve that with a client is respect their autonomy, listen to what they tell you. Active listening is really important. Let your clients do most of the talking. You will learn a lot from what they tell you. Ultimately, only your client can make the change, and they need to find their own reasons to make that change. And this is what motivational interviewing does. It allows them to explore what their reasons are. So that's really important. I've kind of alluded to this throughout, but completion of goals builds self-efficacy and capability. So we really do need some short-term goals, literally weekly goals. The key thing about this is client must own those goals. It's no good you saying, as the nutritionist, the trainer, right, well, what we should aim for this week is 10,000 steps. How does that sound? Because a client is always going to go, yeah, that sounds all right, I'll do that. The problem is they've got no ownership of that. So far better you ask the client what goals you want to set yourself this week, and let them set one or two. Now you can use your experience, education, knowledge to help them maybe modify the goal, because maybe they're setting their sights too high, it's unrealistic, or it's not that advantageous. And so now you kind of have a discussion, again, respecting their autonomy. And so the way you approach that is, that sounds like a really great goal, but I have got a few concerns about that. Would you be interested in hearing my concerns about that goal? Now, 9 times out of 10, the client's going to go, God, yeah, tell me what you think. And this gives you the chance to kind of use your expertise to say, well, you might want to modify that because some of my clients have tried that in the past and it wasn't very successful. And so now I'm respecting their autonomy, I'm engaging with them, and I'm allowing them to modify the goal. But the fact of the matter is, they own the goal. And that's so important. Goals must be documented. It's a rule in the forces that if they're not written down, they never happened. Now, when I work with clients, I've got a contract. It's literally drawn up like a contract. And so when they kind of work with me, we record their goals together, and then they sign it and I sign it off. I witness their signature. And so they feel like, oh, right, I've entered into a contract here. Well, I better do it. So I think getting them written down. The other thing I would say about this, if you are utilizing them as the trainer coach, make sure you continually allude to them. So each week when you meet up with that client, well, that's great what you did there with your diet. That's really moving us towards goal A, B, C, D. Because with you continually mentioning the goals, it sends a signal to the client that these goals are important. It's not just something I'm doing because it's a popular thing to do. So make sure you document goals because that's really important. Now, the final part before I finish here, your goals must be emotionally anchored. And what I mean by that, and I talk a lot about this in the behavior change workshop, is when you've got that long term goal, what you need to do is you need to emotionally anchor it in something that is tangible to you. So, feeling happy, feeling great, a happy occasion, whatever it is. And so, by associating achieving that goal with this emotional state, it's now got an emotional pull. And I haven't really got time to go into how to do it fully now, but I do cover this on some of the courses. But emotion, just look up emotionally anchoring goals. The thing about it is, if you've emotionally anchored a goal, now whenever you come to make decisions, whether it be in the gym, or should I go to the gym, or if you're in the supermarket and you're thinking, should I have that choice or should I go for the kind of fry up or the processed food, whatever, you can always ask yourself one question. And the one question is this moving me towards my goal or away from my goal? And if it's moving you towards your goal, you're actually more likely to make that choice if it's an emotionally anchored goal. So making sure your long-term goals are emotionally anchored is actually quite important, because on a day-to-day basis, when you're having to make those decisions about healthy eating, being active, use the stairs or use the lift, you just ask yourself the same question every time. Does this move me towards my goal or away from it? 9 times out of 10, you will make the choice that's going to move you towards your goal. So that's a quick whistle stop tour of behavior change. There's a lot more there, but hopefully you found a few things in there that might be useful. I've got the next behavior change in MI workshop, which is AFN certified, starts on the 24th. That's Sunday. Um, it's over 4 weekends, and each module is about, well, the first one's 3 hours, the subsequent ones are 2 hours. If you want to learn about psychometric testing your clients, then the psychometric testing workshop is e-learning. So you can do that at your own pace whenever. And the introduction to behavior change workshop is a real simple little course, but it gives you some real basic tools in terms of some of the underpinning principles of behavior change. So I will stop sharing slides at this point and stop the recording, and then I'll start on anybody got any questions. Right, chat box. So I'll stop the recording at this point.